Design Co's live session. It's really wonderful to have you all here today. And with us here today, we have again the wonderful Nathan from Trailhead. Hello, Nathan.
Hello.
And Nathan's just doing everything at the minute. And Nathan is currently putting together just the most awesome product ever for us in the background, a little bit secret squirrel. He's helping another designer develop a product as well with us out of the goodness of his heart, and he's doing live sessions as well to help our community. So thank you so much, Nathan. It's brilliant to be here today.
It's absolutely my pleasure.
So Nathan, what do you have for us today?
So if you were here last week, we started sketching a cat, and we walked through some of the process of sketching for watercolor, and we took it a little bit further and we did a value study and shaded and did all the darks and lights and midtones of the cat illustration, and walked all through that. So now we're going to take that illustration or that sketch, and we're going to turn it into a watercolor painting.
Awesome. And if anyone did miss last week's, go to our Learning Hub. It's there and you can catch up on it. But do watch this session first, obviously, and then you can catch up. You can do it back to front, a little bit back to front, but you can do it. You can do them both one after another.
Right. Do it reverse. Cool. Okay. Ready to roll?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So right down here in the side window, which is an application called BizRef. We talked about it last week, and it's the application that I use to keep all of my my reference photos and things. I've got it open on to the side here. This is the sketch that I did, that I finished out and did before the live stream last week. So this is the sketch for the actual painting that we'll be putting together today. And I've got it open here because this is the full-on value study that I did, meaning that it's got like the lights, it's got the midtones, and it's got the darks. So this is the reference photo that I chose. This is my cat, and that's the reference photo that we'll be using for the painting. So what I have open here is this is the sketch that I made. That's really just the guide sketch for the painting. So it doesn't include all the values. It's just a guide for paint placement. Okay. I'm going to keep the value study open just for reference and the original reference photo. Okay, so I've got everything broken down. I've already painted this. I've got everything broken down into steps. And these layers are not in order of the steps, but we'll be walking through and you can see the layer order as we go. And I'm going to show you the layer, but I'm also going to show you how that layer was painted and what brushes I used and kind of what my thought process was as I was doing it. Awesome. So, okay, so first, now looking at our reference, she's got lots of dark fur, like the dark shadows and lines in her fur, and that's what I wanted to add first. I wanted to start with those darks in place before I move to like midtones and lights. So I want you to see. Let me show you. This is the layer. This is the first layer. Okay, and I'm painting with black, and I'm using some washes and some detailer brushes. I'm going to show you that, but I want to show you what I was thinking, what I was looking for. Now, this is the cat photo, the reference photo, and I just darkened it. I made it black and white, and I darkened it so you could see exactly what it was that I was looking for in this initial step. Okay, so I'm looking at these shapes.
That's really interesting, Nathan, because I know often when I've illustrated things in the past, I'll take them into Photoshop and adjust the levels. And
sure.
And that actually allows you to get the shapes, if that makes sense.
Right. This is what I'm...
Those shadows and the highlights into shapes then?
Right, exactly. Yeah, I'm looking for these shapes here. Okay, all of this here.
Amy says she already owns the Master Watercolor set and she's giving it lots of love.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah.
Everyone's giving your cat lots of love.
Oh, that's awesome. She's a good kitty. Okay, so now that I did this so you could see exactly what it was I was looking for in this step. Okay, so I'm going to choose, I'm going to go with like full black on this one. And okay, now here's where you have a lot of choice, because a lot of these brushes will work fine for this, okay? It just depends on kind of what your personal preference, right? So, and I just chose this smooth watery round. It's in the textured round brushes section, just to show you some examples. And this brush will layer up, so it gets darker as I layer it. Okay, you could choose this soft edge round.
Yes,
It's this. It'll do the same thing. It's just it has more texture. Okay.
You paint with 100% black, but I guess this is pressure sensitive.
Yes. Yeah. Right. So we're kind of building up from gray.
Cool. And Colleen asks why you're choosing to start with darks first when traditionally I go from light to dark. Is there any reason you go from dark to light? Or?
So traditionally, yes, we would go from dark. Well, we would go from light and build in all the darks. But for this painting, because I was just seeing this as like tones and values, because there's not a lot of color going on in this reference. It's really just tones, right? So I just wanted, like, you could have start with the whites, but the paper's white, right? So you've got to start with something. You got to start somewhere, right? So with this one, I just chose to go with the darks. And here in a sec, I'm going to lay in some washes so that we can see the whites. So we're kind of with traditional watercolor. It would kind of be, the process would be a little different. But since this is digital, we have the freedom,
sure, right,
to do it however we want.
So I guess you work a lot between both the mediums, so you're
right,
working light to dark and dark to light.
Oh, for sure. And this particular painting, looking at it, the way I wanted to tackle it was just laying in the darks first. And we'll add some more as we go, but this is just the initial darks. So you could use any of these round brushes, right? You could also use any of these detail brushes. And the one I chose was the loaded into wet, and I scaled it up. I think it's about as high as it would go because it's a smaller brush. Just because I wanted that, see the difference in the line? Like this one here is more of a hard line, which you can certainly use. This one here is more texture. And then this one has got more of that kind of a bleeding edge line. Okay, so that's the one I chose to go with. I mean, you can go with any of these, and I think it would get the job done. But that's just the one that I chose. Okay, so again, what I'm doing here is I'm just painting in, and we're starting with gray, and you can build it up. Let's scale this down a little bit. You don't even have to be like real precise. You know, I'm using these sketch lines as a guide, and I'm just laying in some of these darks. Sometimes this is like the hardest part, right? It's like trying to decide where to go first.
For sure.
You know? But I find that once you get like some of this, it's just like initial paint. You know, this is just like, we're just starting out here. We got to start somewhere, like I said before. So you just got to get some paint laid down. And that's what we're doing.
Marie asks, are you using layers for dark, medium, and light?
Yes. Yeah, you'll see. Okay. Yes. I would recommend using layers, especially at first. Now, there are times when this painting was for demonstration purposes, so I've used more layers than I would have normally, because I like for things sometimes to kind of blend together. Either that, or I'll layer and then I'll flatten it as I paint. But for this one, we're going to see a lot of layers because I left everything so that I could demo what I was doing. But if you're not comfortable, meaning like you're going to paint something and then you may take it away and then try something else, definitely paint in layers. That'll make it way easier to experiment. But if you get real comfortable with it, then you don't necessarily have to. Okay, so that's the process for this. Now I want to show you one more thing with this stage that I did. So a lot of times traditional watercolor won't look this smooth, right? So I mean, we start to get this area of smoothness. I'm gonna show you just right here. this kind of area right here where things just start to look really like solid and smooth. Now, watercolor always has some kind of texture, whether it's the texture of the paper or it's just the texture of the paint itself, because it's so thin and transparent. It just typically has some kind of texture, right? So now, if you have the master watercolor brush set, you already know that there's 3 sections. There's the brushes, there's the washes, and there's the splatters. So the washes includes a gigantic set of what I call washes, where that's just it's photographs and high resolution scans of actual watercolor, wet and painted wet into wet. That just creates these just random textury stamps, and I use these a lot. And I'm going to show you what I did here. I'm going to use the eraser brush. I'm going to go into the washes, and I'm going to use this to just kind of add some texture to this layer, right? I'm going to take down the opacity a little bit, and let's scale it down a little bit. And so see how I'm just coming in here and adding just like a little bit of erased, just adding some texture back in. Now you can take the blur tool and blur some of that together.
Neve's asking again about, is this done in the ultimate brush set? And it's not, it's done in the master watercolor. But I guess, Nathan, you could get similar effects like this with the other pack as well.
Absolutely. So
covered, it's just, you know, this is a more extended set.
This is a more extensive watercolor set. The master set includes, I think it's 148 brushes. And then the ultimate brush toolbox watercolor set is maybe about 30. And it certainly includes everything. Yeah, it certainly includes everything that you need, but it's the ultimate set is part of that whole mixed media. It's part of a whole, whereas the master watercolor set is just watercolor, like all encompassing, just watercolor. Does that make sense? Does that answer that question?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Nathan.
Okay. Okay, so here's my final darks layer. And you can see right here that I erased out some of those sections or some of that area with a wash stamp. Now, it also added a great bit of texture and just kind of where we begin to fade out, because I knew I wanted some of this down here to fade out as it went, you know, towards the bottom of the cat's shoulder. Okay. So now I knew that I wanted to paint in some lights, but in order to do that, I needed something in the background so that I could see those lights, right? So I laid in an initial background wash. Now I chose, okay, hang with me while we dive into a little bit of color theory. Okay, so I chose orange because the cat's eye is kind of this. Do you hear that noise? I apologize for the background noise. Okay, so the cat's eye is kind of this bluish aqua green color, right? If you're familiar with the color wheel, the opposite of the color blue is orange on the color wheel. So I wanted that blue of her eye to jump out. She also has a little bit of that sort of tannish orange around in places in her fur, right? So that's why I chose orange as the background wash, because one, I knew it would play well with her eye, and I knew that we would catch some of it in the fur. Okay, so what I did here, and I want to talk a little bit about laying in these washes, because it's real easy to get carried away, and I want you to know what I'm thinking a little bit when I'm laying these in. So if we go over to the washes, now these washes are categorized. This section is water washes, where they're a little bit thinner, and then we've got some splatter washes that are washes that also include splatters. Okay, so I'm going to look at some of these water washes, and if I lay it in, now if I just do that and I look at it immediately, like I can see that we start to like change the shape of our design, and I don't want that to happen. I want to be conscious of the shape that I'm adding. Okay, so I'm gonna erase that one. I'm going to try another one, and I'm going to try to keep shape in mind. I want it to look like a natural extension of what we've already painted, if that makes sense, right? Like that right there. Okay, that looks like it's naturally part of the painting. It's not changing the shape of our composition much. It just seems like it fits in naturally. So as I go, I want to keep that stuff in mind. That one seems like it fits. And I want to go a little bit outside the face.
Sam's
Something like
an
that.
interesting question, which kind of ties in with this a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
She says, do you find it a struggle not to be precise when drawing in watercolor realistic style? Is it just more messy? How would you suggest we avoid to be too precise with this kind of portrait and art? Is the brush selection part of that and going outside the lines? And
it certainly is. And so here's kind of the way I think about it is I'm painting loosely, and I'm drilling down to detail. Now I hit some of the detail here around the eye with that initial dark layer. That's there because it's part of this layer, but I probably detailed that eye further into the painting. Does that make sense? It's part of this layer for demonstration purposes, but as I was painting, the detail in this eye and right here around the nose was probably a little further down the line in the painting, because typically I will do stuff like what we're doing here because it's real loose, right? We're kind of throwing paint, and traditionally that's what I would do. I would wet the whole drawing, I'd wet the whole paper, and I would add the colors that I want, and I would let the you hear watercolor paints itself. You know, that's kind of what that means. Like that's what we're doing here is, to some degree, we're throwing in these washes because it's real random and it generates that real randomness. Like I didn't paint these little splatters right here. Okay, I didn't paint, meaning I didn't like put my brush to the screen and paint that in. You know, these bleeds that we have out here, you know, I didn't necessarily put my brush in to paint. I got that randomness, okay, that real watercolor has. So as we go, you're going to see that, you know, we're going to get this randomness in, and then we're going to drill down to those details. Okay, so that's what I'm thinking as I'm laying in these washes. I want it to be like an extension of the painting so far at this step. Like I don't want to add a lot of shape to the composition. And another thing that I'll do, because I'll show you, this is my actual initial wash layer. Now you can see right here that I took the blur. Like I don't know if you can see this, but some of it's kind of blurred out. Like you can take the blur tool, smudge tool, and you could blur out some of these harder edges if you wanted to. Okay, if something looks distracting, you know, like if it's distracting your eye, you know, like up here maybe, you could just take and just blur some of that out. Okay, so that's our initial wash. Okay, now because I have some tone in place, now I can go in and I can paint some of the whites. Okay, which I've done here in this layer. Now, what I want to show you about this, I'm using a brush. Okay, so brush selection, especially when you're painting white, brush selection plays a big role, and I'll show you why. Because I could paint in some of these details. Whoops, I'm going to choose white. I can paint in some of these details, but if you can see my brush stroke there, that's not white. Okay, we're getting this sort of light orange color, right? So when I'm painting in these whites, a lot of times I'll use this brush loaded with paint, or I'll use the fine liner. I'm using loaded with paint a lot because it's a very opaque brush. So this will be essentially like painting with white gouache in a traditional painting. Like if you want to go back and you want to add whites to a painting, like you have to use acrylic or you have to use white gouache because those paints are opaque, and watercolor is not opaque. So if you have a white watercolor, it's going to be transparent. Okay, so as I'm painting this edge, I want to keep in mind how watercolor also bleeds a little bit. So I didn't want to have a really hard edge on her mouth here and chin. So I went back and I used the same loaded with paint brush on the eraser tool, and I'm just kind of erasing out some of the edge so that it appears kind of like where it would bleed a little bit. And I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the sketch too, so you can see that a little bit better. See, it just kind of has a rough edge. Let's see if we can look around at some other stuff here. So, okay, so up here, now white gouache in traditional will also, the more water you have in the paint, the more transparent that gouache will become, okay? So I wanted this to appear like it was a bit transparent. So if I use the smudge tool, and I can smudge this out to be a little bit more transparent. There's white paint there, but I've blended it out so that it's a little bit more transparent. So I did this all around the cat and created all of my highlights. Get that up there. So you can see what's happening there. I'm using the sketch as a guide and using the reference photo, the value study as a guide, and I'm placing in all of the whites. So we go from here, and let me turn the sketch back on. So we're going from here to here.
That's very cool. Awesome.
So now at this point, like, it's really starting to take shape, and we're like, you know, we're 3 or 4 steps in, and I'm starting to see, like, you know, I'm starting to see the decisions that I'm making come to life, and it's starting to have some 3-dimensionality. So from here, I've got in my darkest darks and my lightest lights, and I knew, looking at, you know, the value study and looking at the reference photo, there's lots of grays in between, okay? And so I added a layer of light grays, and I'm gonna turn the sketch back off so you can see that. So I just basically took a, I believe I used, let's see, I used the water brush a lot for this one, because it's kind of, it's an in-between brush, meaning like it's not super light, it's not super transparent. And you can layer it real subtly.
Bill says he spent 2 hours playing with the brushes, making notes and adding green circle emojis in front of the names of my favorites.
Nice.
So
that's cool.
back, right?
I like that. That's cool. You know, I tried to categorize everything in this brush set because it's so large. I tried to add in these like markers that tell you like what each section is. And you would be surprised at how many emails I've gotten saying that people saying that they can't get this brush to work. You know, it's just a dotted line. I don't understand. It's like, no, that's to help you. That's a guide. That's to help you mark the different categories of brushes.
Appearing in an ink pack soon.
Right? Okay, so grays, these light grays, just coming in. It's a subtle change, but it's there. It's just getting in those middle tones, that little bit of gray. Okay, so now
your canvas size, is it 4.5 by 4.5? Is that your normal?
My canvas size right now is 4,000 by 5,000 pixels.
Cool.
Okay, so now I started to notice that I wanted a little bit more of a value change here in this area, because like this is the focus of the painting right here. So there wasn't enough value contrast from here to her face for me at this stage. Okay, so I needed something darker. You know, I needed, in order to punch out the highlights, I need to go darker with that background wash. You can kind of see a demonstration there. Like I need that, right? So what I did was I layered in another level of washes, but this time I'm going with a much darker orange. Okay, so in this one, I'm going to show you, I used the splatter washes because these washes tend to have a little bit of a harder edge, and they also include a few splatters. Okay, so I knew that I would get a little bit of that harder edge and random bit of splatter. But again, like I don't want to add anything that's like crazy distracting. You know what I mean? I don't want to change the shape of the composition a whole lot. And again, you can also take the blur tool. I've got that loaded into wet for the smudge tool. And some of these hard edges, you can blur out. Because what happens is, like, if you have some of these washes, they include hard edges, and your eye tends to be drawn to hard edges, like this one right here. Show you a quick example. Like, your eye might be drawn to that right there. Yeah, so you kind of have to watch out for that kind of stuff. So that's something that you might just choose to just blend a little bit, you know, so because you don't want anything distracting. Like, you may choose, you know, it's up to you. You may choose to leave it because it works with whatever you're painting. But, you know, for some, you have to watch out with the washes, because sometimes it kind of changes the eye line or where the eye leads in the painting because of the hard edges or the splatters, right? Okay, cool. So my darker washes layer right here, that's what I chose to go with.
Nice.
So from here, now I decided to detail the eye and the nose, okay? Which adds a lot. Like, anytime you're doing an animal painting, right? And when you add the eye, somehow it just suddenly becomes to life, right? Because we're kind of like, you know, a little bit of zombie kitty going on right here, and then suddenly it just kind of comes to life, right? Because we've got in that contrast of the eye and like the reflection of the eye. So what I did here was I knew that I wanted to get a color real close, because we're painting colors real close to the reference. We're not going real wild with the colors. So I wanted like a good like aqua blue or aqua green, and I painted this in. I used a combination between the water brush and the loaded with paint. I colored this in, and I used a hard, if you can see this here, I used a hard edge, and likely it was the fine liner to paint in. Oops. Nope, I bet it was. Oh, here we go. I'm on the wrong layer.
Lots of "I'm learning so much" comments, Nathan. Which
is sweet. Oh, that's so great.
I really love this, and it's fascinating. And Nisha just says, "Wow." I have to say, I completely concur. It's pretty awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. That just means a ton, really. Okay, so and there's a nice pink and a pink highlight in the nose. Now you can see, like, it's kind of rough, right? Like, because, you know, it's watercolor, so you don't, you know, I don't want to tell you or want you to think that, like, you need to go in and get this real sharp, you know, shape all the time, you know, this real sharp shape. Like, you can let it kind of be rough, and you can let it bleed, let some of those colors bleed together. Okay, so it doesn't have to be super, you know, for one, we're also viewing it at this size, right? I think that's kind of a thing where, you know, when you're painting digitally, especially at a 4,000 by 5,000 pixels is really large, you have a tendency to kind of want to zoom in like this and paint like at this size. But I would caution you against doing that, because it's never going to be viewed at that size. Like, nobody's ever going to zoom in to detail like that. You know, it's going to be viewed, you know, more like at a distance like this. So there's really no need to go in and detail to that level. You know, not for a painting like this, not for a watercolor. Okay, so now, so now I'm looking at it and I'm comparing it to the reference, okay? And I can see that there are a few things that I want to touch up, okay? I can see that there's a bit of, there's a bit of detail, like right in here, that I want to touch up. And there's some stuff going on here probably, and up here that I want to touch up and just add to a little bit. Okay, probably around the eye, this stuff needs to be added. And then right in here, these kind of dots need to be added. So I created one more layer, and I'm calling it face touch-ups, and I'm going to show you what it's going to do. Okay, so see how I'm just adding in some of the darks to really just kind of detail up the face. If you can see what's happening there. And again, I'm just using brushes from the detail brush set, because these tend to be smaller round brushes. These here. And just adding that detail. Okay, so this was a touch-up phase, right? I'm comparing to the reference. I'm thinking, well, where am I at? Okay, I need to add a little bit more detail in the face, a little bit more definition. Okay. All right, now I've hit a spot where I'm looking at this area. Okay, and like we were talking about earlier, I'm getting like this, it's too smooth feeling, right? It's too it's not textured enough. It's not interesting enough. So what I did was I added another white wash, and I just it created some diffusion in that solid black. Okay.
Sam also asked if you treat like long-haired animals. This is Sam, who's working hard right now. I hasten to add, and is multitasking. But another excellent question, in which is, do you treat long-haired animals differently to some soft-haired animals?
You know, no, I really don't. And here's why: because I'm looking for shapes in the hair and the fur, right? I'm always looking for shapes. It doesn't matter if it's short hair or long hair. You're turning everything into shapes. So, for example, like this is a short hair cat, right? So I'm just looking. I'm gonna turn this back off. You know, like we showed before in, I think I deleted that layer. You know, I'm looking at this as a shape. You know, this thing right here, this area. Okay. Now, there may be some level of detail in the fur in longer haired animals where there's areas where you could detail a little bit more. Like maybe there's some long hairs that jump out here that you could detail, you know, or something, or maybe they're in here somewhere that you could kind of bring them out of the shadow. But you're still just modifying a shape, right? You're still just looking for these dark fur shapes or light fur shapes or shadow shapes. That's the shapes that you want to define in the painting and not worry so much about the fur. Now it may come down to a little bit of change in detail, because we're not going to do a lot of fur detail because her hair is so short. And another thing too, that when I wanted to add this bit of diffusion, and the way I did that was I took a whitewash and I just placed it, take down the opacity a little bit, I just placed it in here. Okay, that's another thing about the wash brushes too, because if you full opacity, you're going to get like it's going to erase fully, right? But if you take down the opacity, it's almost like it's just a subtle bit of change. It's a subtle bit of texture. Like, see, even that works. It just breaks up that really dark area. Okay, so I just wanted to add a bit because she really has it here in the fur. Like if you look real close, there's the tips of the fur are gray or white. So we need something to break up that black. Okay, so for me, a white wash over that area does the trick. And I like this one because it really looked like it bled like a wet, watery wash would do in traditional. And it also, now see, I nerd out about this a little bit, so you have to hang with me. It also like added kind of some directional pieces to the fur. Like if you can see that, like that's not intentional. Okay, like that is not, you know, that's just the wash did that. And that's one of those aspects where you let watercolor kind of paint itself. You get like these little bit of directional pieces, and that wasn't intentional. That's like a happy little accident, right?
Marie says she's going to have to break up with you virtually, as every time she watches one of these, she buys another one of your brush sets because they're too good.
Cool.
Anyone who hasn't seen it, go and check it out.
I understand.
Previews for the Master Watercolor Procreate brushes, because they're beautiful, and it says it all really. And the same for the Ultimate Brush Toolbox. You know, the previews are just stunning.
I understand, and I won't hold it against her. Okay. All right. How are we doing on time? Okay, cool.
We're good.
All right. Now, okay, so another method that I used in this painting to sort of break up some of the smoothness of our shapes, right? Some of the smoothness of our colors is I used a salt brush, and I'm going to use solid white. And I want to show you these salt brushes really quick because they're great for adding texture. They're in the brushes set, and they're along towards the bottom. Or maybe I passed them. Oh no, here they are. Special effects. Okay. Sprinkled salt, super salty, water and salt grain. All of these are variations on the same idea. if you press lightly, you can see how it just adds this little bit. Okay, now if I press really hard, we get this, okay? But we just want like this really light. If you come and do it again, I'm gonna zoom in. See these solid colors, and I'm just gonna lightly, whoops, too hard. I'm gonna lightly break that up, real soft. Okay, and you can do that around in a few different places. It's so subtle, even if I turn the opacity down. Like it's super subtle, right? And it just adds, I'm kind of in a way, for me, this kind of mimics some of these highlights you see in the fur. You know, we're kind of trying to mimic a little bit of that. We're trying to mimic that without actually going in with and doing this. Now, there's nothing wrong with this, and there's definitely a place for this where we're doing hair like this. You know, like that. I'm trying to avoid that in this painting. You know, where we would do hair, something like that. I try to avoid painting individual strands of fur. And there's sometimes there's a place for that, but in this particular painting, I wanted to avoid that. Okay, so this is my final salt layer. You can see. Oh, let me zoom out so you can see it again, because I added it. I added some in the background wash as well. So if you can see that, it just adds this subtle bit of detailing, and we really didn't do any work. Like I didn't go in individually and paint these tiny little specks of salty splatter. Okay. Cool.
Very cool.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. Now we're almost to my favorite part. Okay. Mm-hmm. I love splatters, right? I mean, I love, because in traditional, like you just kind of go nuts, like you wet the brush and you like tap it on your finger and you just kind of throw some splatters around on the painting. And the way you would touch it up in traditional is like, oh, I have a paper towel in my left hand and I like blot out some of the splatters where I don't want them, right? But with digital, we can just kind of go nuts and, you know, control every single aspect of it. So what I have here, I separated into like dark splatters and light splatters. So my dark splatters layer, I'm going to show you a couple of things here. So I like to add splatters because to me, it adds this extra bit of rendering. And I say that because our eyes are drawn to sharp edges, okay, to sharp, you know, like the nose is a sharper edge, her eye is a sharper edge. But then up here, we have all these soft edges because they're less important. Okay, like down here, we have all these soft edges because they're less important. But these splatters add this extra little bit of rendering because of all of the hard edges. Okay, so if we turn them off right here, somehow to me, it looks a little less rendered than it does now. Okay, and what I'm looking for, I'm going to turn this back off so I can show you, because you also have to compose a little bit with splatters. And what I mean by that, now, because I love splatters so much, there is in the master watercolor brush set, there is a section of splatters, okay, all different types. Okay, they've got heavy splatters. Okay, these are real dense splatters. I've got wet splatters, which include like a bit of water, tiny splatters, and then I've got splatter painters. We'll look at those in a second. And then I've got like single drips.
Amy asks how you balance out the splatters.
Okay, I'm gonna show you, because here's what I'm looking for. Okay, let's just take heavy splatters as an example, and I'm gonna go with black just so you can see it really well. Okay, so if we look at this splatter brush, just we tap that one down, we can see that it has a direction to it. Okay, these splatters are going in that direction. Okay, so if this was flat on the table and I was holding an actual brush in my hand and I'm splattering, they're shooting this direction. Okay, so when I place that, go back to the splatters, like I don't want to place that one here. I would want to place that one over here because my paint is already going in that direction. So it adds a nice balance to this side, this particular brush, but not to this side. And I certainly don't want to add too many over my focal point because it just kind of destroys what I'm supposed to be looking at. Okay.
I think that ties what Lindsay's just asked. How do you know when to stop? I know I might go
hold on
in there as well.
Yeah.
More spatters, more spatters, a few more.
How do we know when to stop? We'll get there.
Cool.
Hang on. That's a really good question. It's one I struggle with from time to time. Okay. Now, what you can do, you can certainly tap this brush and then change the direction. Okay. You could certainly do that, but you want to be, and it fits nicely down there. But you can see, and let me add another one real quick. Let's take one more look. Let's take a look at another one. Now, all the heavy splatters probably have some directions. That one may be a little too dense, right? It kind of works there, but I would probably want to tone that one back a little bit so that it's not so dense. Okay, but you can still see some of the direction there. Okay. So in my mind, direction probably looks a little bit like this because it's the way I see the paint flowing. Okay. This way, this way, this way, that way, that way. So basically away from the focal point, which is here. Okay, so that's kind of the directions that I want my splatters to go. So you can't just throw them down, right? You got to kind of keep in mind the composition and the direction and the way those splatters feel.
Are they kind of framing the composition and focusing the eye as well?
They are framing a bit of the composition for sure. And you definitely want to keep that in mind. So let me clear this layer out, and I want to show you one more type of splatter brush. I want to show you, because I added a bit of orange. I have the splatter painters in here, and these are a little bit different than like the other splatter brushes because they're pressure sensitive. If you can see what's happening there. And I'm just varying the pressure as I go. So you can see like real lightly what's happening. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit. That's really weird looking, right? But it creates this really awesome texture. And it looks like we splattered really early on in the painting. You know, it looks like we splattered some of the washes very early on, but we actually are doing it at a later stage. Okay, so in my final dark splatter layer, delete some of these, you can see that I've got a few of those splatter painters in there. Okay, so you can kind of see that that my splatters are adding to the composition, but they're not changing it. You know, they're reinforcing it. They're not changing the composition. Okay, now to further enforce the splatters, I add another layer of light splatters. Let me zoom out so you can see that. I'm gonna close this out so we can kind of, because we're kind of past looking at the reference. So I'm gonna close that out just so I have more space to show you. So let me turn that layer off and on. Okay, light splatters. It's really subtle, if you can see that. But I'm taking some of these, I'm using white. I'm taking some of the splatter painters. I'm also taking some of these wet splatters, which they are, you can see that, they're not as opaque, okay? Even if you turn the opacity down, they're even less. And I'm just adding in some of that subtle detail. It's like you're detailing with splatters, if that makes sense. You can see what's happening. It's just adding this bit of render to it that wasn't there before. We're breaking up some of those solid areas of paint with just some of these splatters.
Sam says she can't believe you did it using just 4 colors, using such a limited color palette.
Right. Yeah, I tried to keep this one real simple and really simple in colors, because you can go crazy with colors. You can just go crazy with color. So I tried to keep it real simple, and I find that like with color, less is more oftentimes. You know, if you can keep something real balanced with the color wheel, you know, keep complementary type colors in mind, it has more impact than adding, you know, so many colors that it's just, it almost becomes confusing for your eye to look at. Okay, so a lot of times, you know, you asked about before, you asked how do you know when you're done? Okay, well, I added one more, like, because I knew that the whiskers, I closed the reference photo, but there's all of the whiskers were this sharp bit of detail, you know, these final little details, and you'll see what I mean. Like when you add the whiskers,
I was going to say,
it's like
Deb asked a question and it just said, "What about the whiskers?"
Right. the reason I add them, yeah, the reason I add them last is just because it just feels like this final level of detail to me, and I don't want it to distract me. I don't want it to distract my eye from what's underneath, right? Because I want to get all of this right before. Because once I add the whiskers, like that's what I see is the whiskers. Yeah, I see the eye and the whiskers, because the eye and the whiskers are the sharpest lines, and the whiskers certainly have the most value contrast. Like they're the lightest light in the whole piece. So my eye is really drawn to the whiskers and then the highlight in the eye. Okay. Now, if you've seen watch me paint before, you know that I like to add a little bit of a curves adjustment towards the end. So what I do, I mean, this is fine the way it is, but I like to play a little bit with the curves because cool things always happen. Because I'm gonna 3-finger swipe to get copy all, and then I'm gonna 3-finger swipe again to paste. Okay, so now we have this. It includes the white. Okay, this layer above everything else, and I'm gonna hit a curves on this layer. And I like to just add all of these dots along the curves line, and I like to move them because if you can see what's happening, like it's adjusting some of the darks, but not all of them. And like I can kind of get this cool, like see some of the oranges are popping out. It's really weird. Like look at that. Look at like what is that doing? You know, it just does this really cool. You know, you can like see that's crazy. Where did all that come from? Yeah, you can just add these spontaneous adjustments. I think that's kind of neat.
Awesome.
There's something like that right there.
That looks awesome, Nathan. Just awesome.
But wait, there's more. Okay.
I should say to everyone that didn't see the last session, I asked everyone if the community would like Nathan to make more learning based products based around watercolor, and there was a resounding yes. So you never know. Watch this space.
You know, if you had asked me a couple of years ago, would you enjoy teaching this type of painting? I probably would have said, oh, no, I'd be too, I don't know. No. But, I've grown into this where I really enjoy, because I like this light bulb moment that people have, when you're showing them something and they're like, oh my gosh, and then it changes the way they paint, or it changes the way they think about painting. And that's just so cool and exciting to me. I love that. That's my favorite aspect of teaching.
For sure. Me too.
Okay.
Yep.
Final thing. Here we go. I'm going to take this cat painting and I'm going to add it to this is a watercolor texture from the Ultimate Canvas Creator. Okay. Now I'm going to turn the paper on and off. Okay. So here's our painting, right? And if you have the Ultimate Canvas Creator, you know that your painting goes below the paper folder here. And I'm going to turn it on, and you can see that it adds this level of realism. And this is just simply copying and pasting. I didn't do anything else, just copy and paste the painting into this file. So here's without the texture, and here it is with the texture. Okay, so you can see how real it becomes when we add that watercolor paper texture, because watercolor paper is so essential to the look of watercolor, right? Because it's this really rough textured paper, and that just adds this awesome final touch.
And so much more depth as well. I think I said that a number of our community bought that pack and have been using it and putting it their outcomes on Instagram.
Yes.
Nathan springs to mind particularly because she did a number where she's like before and after with the canvas pack and said which is better, and it's always with the canvas pack.
Right, cool. That's awesome.
It just adds so much more depth. It's great.
Yeah, it does. It tends to add some contrast too. Like it just, it adds a bit of depth to it, and that having that real world texture added in, it pushes it over the level, right? It pushes it over the top.
So if anyone's interested in the canvas pack, go check it out. But check out Eleanor's work as well. I'm not sure if Mariana can quickly find that and link up, because there's a few pieces in there recently. It's really interesting to see.
Yeah. Cool.
But Nathan, that was just an absolutely, it just always is an awesome session. I love watching you work.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's so cool, and it always goes down. Carol says, "Yay, Photoshop 2." Exactly.
Cool.
That's super cool to see. So please, everybody, say thank you. Give Nathan some love in the comments. That would be absolutely awesome. Thanks
so much.
Hope to see you again here soon. And
Absolutely.
Looking forward to more product and design goodies from you coming out.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it, guys.